I think I want to start off by saying this album feels like a combination of everything that Childish Gambino has given us over the last decade. The, at the time, odd stereotypical lifestyle of Kawhi with the slight poppiness of Because the Internet, the artistic maturity and cultural awareness on Awaken My Love, but without the melodramatic suburbia of Camp, even though slight glimpses of that do manage to peek in every so often. Gambino really impressed me in 2016 when he dropped Awaken My Love. It was really soulful, very groovy, very rhythmic, a throwback to some of your favorite soul singers of all time, most notably Bootsy Collins with his Redbone single. So it was quite a surprise when 2 years later we got This Is America, a really politically charged statement about the state of our country and about primarily black people in it. So it was a shock seeing this album show up because I would think it would take you a while to build off of something like that. Immediately, the intro is pretty isolated. There's not much going on. You know, I imagine myself as some type of artificial intelligence possibly being reprogrammed. Then we hop into the next track, Algorhythm, which is a very 808s and Heartbreaks Kanye-inspired cut. Electronic funk and soul is a pretty great foundation to build the eventual idea that attempts to be realized during 3:15:20, as it comes off like an AI existing in virtual reality whose soulful vocal peaks keep breaking through their coding. As we get closer to the end, it's almost like his own ideas and thoughts are being suppressed and almost tampered with. And Time is a pretty decent exploration of Gambino's feelings of our consistent confusion and what he feels may be our eventual doom. And while I like the sentiments expressed here, Gambino's vocals just don't do it for me much at all, especially when he has Ariana Grande, in my opinion, outperforming him on this song, and a guest choir that makes me wonder why he did any of the singing on this hook at all. Though if he didn't, I doubt this track's length could be justified. Everything here sounds really futuristic and really controlled and very 80s, subtle synths everywhere, nice drums, but again, pretty Kanye inspired. 1238 is really just this album's high point for me, where everything comes together beautifully. It's a perfect combination of vocal expression and charisma. He kind of comes off like JPEG Mafia in its infancy, transitioning between typical Atlanta rapper to soulful with these smothered, almost Jeremiah-like radio breaks that keep peeking in that become much more pronounced as the song progresses. And I do think that 21 Savage has solidified himself as a cheat code MC the way he rides electronic funk. There hasn't been a single track over the last year, I would say, that hasn't sounded good coming from 21 Savage. Beautiful use of a sample that breaks in between, and then the, like I said, radio bit just plays throughout the rest of the track. It's great. But again, this is probably the only track, or one of few, that I think does this perfectly. See, 1910 focuses more on the value that Gambino's father is saying he should have within himself as a young child, so that these values and these, I guess, teachings of self-love should be within him by the time he grows to be an adult. Gambino's father is preparing him for the world's hypocrisy, simply saying you're likely to be scrutinized, but at the same time you're likely to be exploited. The back and forth and the tug of war Donald has had with his insecurities make him hesitate, and it's off-putting considering they're the same things that help make him famous. Heavy Prince influence on this track though. Like, imagine Prince being emulated over futuristic 80s pop music that traverses into the industrial lane, the soul lane, and even a portamento feature being used on a synth throughout that gets more isolated around the 3-minute and 50-second mark. Made me think of some G-Funk, so it's like almost some pretty nice and almost fluid genre bending here. 2419 is a track that expresses his appreciation for the mother of his child, for always sticking by him, loving him, seeing the good in him that he might not even see in himself. And while he struggles with fidelity, self-love, and inconsideration, she's remained one of the most consistently good things in his life. I just think this track could get its point across in 3 to 4 minutes as opposed to 8. I will give artistic credit to the connection the end of this track has to Algorhythm though, as he has this panic or anxiety attack after breaking free from the coding in the algorithm and finally learns what is important to maintain and appreciate. This small part of the end of this track is so important to the overall theme of the record because he's so conditioned to living within this algorithm that he hasn't even learned to breathe properly outside of it. Even with the Frank Ocean-esque vocals, I even like that there are moments on this track that feel like extensions of Redbone. And look, I think a lot of the ideas on this track are pretty respectable. I also think that a lot of them require so much time because they get sucked up in the amount of space that the tracks provide. I mean, seriously, my guy, like 8 minutes to essentially say thanks? 3222 is just not it. Okay, it's just not it. It sounds like if you tried to put Pac-Man in a game of Centipede over a Yeezus beat. Sonically, it builds up into absolutely nothing. I like the humorous and joyous tone in 3531 with its square dance, country-ish foundation. What I perceive to be slight jabs at America for demonizing the drug culture and braggadocio that can be found in mainstream rap, but not addressing such shallow themes in mainstream country music. Main issue with this track is it doesn't add much to the conversation surrounding drug culture. It's not very nuanced, but it does aid in Gambino's earlier point in 1910 about exploitation, how the lives lived by these artists up to the point of their fame is exploited for profit, as he's doing the exact same thing when it comes to drug culture over such a carefree instrumental. It's actually quite deceiving. But then we take a nosedive back into extending tracks just for the sake of extending tracks to me. 3928 is drawn out and could essentially just be an interlude. Still not that big of a fan of Feels Like Summer. Can appreciate the vibe that it's going for, but I feel like it's trying so hard to be a vibe that it forgets to be a song and eventually has nothing memorable going for it, just rehashing the same melodies for 6 minutes or so. And 4748 expresses the fear Donald has putting his child in the world that he's described up until this point in the album. The justification for this track being so slow would be that it's funky, it's groovy, but it takes him so long, in my opinion, for him to get his ideas out. It's reminding me of the mantra-like refrains off of Solange's When I Get Home record, but the ideas were pretty consistent throughout, so you knew pretty much what she was going for when the track started. Meanwhile, Gambino makes you sit through these musical safaris where for the most part you're seeing one type of animal whose features are being explained to you by the guide once every 10 minutes. His kid sounds adorable and precious though, like protect this kid at all costs. We're coming to the end here, right? If this album is about self-love and coming to terms with your own standards of satisfactory and happiness, all while trying to break free from the ideas, mantras, and algorithms that life has taught you in your infancy, in your innocence, then I think that's great. However, unlike his last record, this tends to get lost in its own message. Where on Awaken My Love, the album seemed to have the attention span of an adult that was going through a mature growing process, 31520 seems to have the attention span of a child, not really going beyond the rough draft, song ideas not fully being tapped into because they prioritize aesthetic over content. It sounds pretty unfinished, not fully realized, but unlike Endless or Untitled Unmastered that seem to intentionally have this rough draft or B-sides air around them, I think 315 actually thinks it's finished when it's not. It much more appropriately could have fit as a soundtrack for one of his films more than its own musical endeavor, because it feels more like a compilation than a concept. The influences are really heavy. Some tracks I feel like he got right out of Kanye's dumpster. Other tracks it feels like he dug up Prince's old albums and got possessed in doing so. The topics that are interesting enough to discuss aren't very nuanced beyond the we're living in a simulation vibe I get from a fair bit of the project. And I don't know if it's just me that feels this way about the record, but a lot of it sounds like the way he's found happiness, not necessarily the way his audience can. And while that isn't his responsibility, I never quite felt included in this listen, like he was talking about people in general. Even if he were tackling themes that could apply to a large array of people, it for the most part centers around himself. And that wouldn't be a problem if on this album it were handled with the emotional and thematic care of Awaken My Love, or the deceptive perceptivity of This Is America, but it isn't. There are various themes from what I perceive to be the pinnacle of Donald's satisfaction that I wish he either fleshed out more or talked about in a way that felt inclusive enough for them to resonate with me. And I wouldn't mind him singing or rapping more if it weren't handicapped by the same effects that he felt the need to throw all over the record. I mean, what good is having a great singing voice if you're just gonna distort it? This album is interesting musically with goals that are really easy to support. Self-love, breaking free, being content, appreciating the things that make you happy and only those things. But instead of drawing me in, anticipating what's next, I find myself asking, are we there yet? A lot on this album. And that isn't to slight Gambino or his recording process, the thought that went into the record at all, but it's just to say that It feels more like someone threw a bunch of paint at a wall and said that this is an art piece when really it's just a bunch of paint thrown at a wall. Definitely enjoyable, but I don't know. I'm just not feeling myself coming back to it like that. Donald Glover with 3/15/20. That's how I feel about it. You let me know how you feel about it in the comment section down below. Very interested to hear your thoughts and opinions on it. And I'll see y'all in the next one, and I'm out. Peace.